Alright, if you saw the title, you're probably wondering, what is Miguel talking about today? But let's jump right into it because it's actually super interesting, and I fell down this rabbit hole when I was doing this research. And it takes us to the occult, it takes us to science, it takes us to censorship, it takes us in many different directions, and honestly I feel like I probably need to do a much deeper dive into this depending on your response to this video, because I find it really interesting. And obviously from the title we're talking about aliens, and whether or not China or Chinese people believe in aliens, and why we don't have more reports about aliens and alien sightings from China, because China is the largest nation. I think India might have passed it now, but in terms of population, China has one of the largest populations on the planet, and for probably the last maybe 15 years, most people have had cell phones, right? And most of those cell phones have cameras on it, so you can film the sky. But there's not a ton of alien sightings or alien stories or UFO stories coming out of China, and I thought it was really interesting, and I wanted to dive into it specifically because there was a report not too long ago from News Nation, and this guy, David Ghosh, I think is how you pronounce his name, came out and said the United States has alien craft, that they have a recovery program and they've recovered alien spacecrafts or crafts that are not from Earth or not man-made, is kind of the terminology or the way that he phrased it. And then also the interviewer asked, well, do we have alien bodies? And he said, well, something's got to be piloting the craft, so yeah, we have alien crafts in alien bodies.
When you say crash retrieval, what do you mean?
These are retrieving non-human origin technical vehicles, call it spacecraft if you will, non-human, exotic origin vehicles that have either landed or crashed.
We have spacecraft from another species.
We do, yeah.
Do we have bodies? Do we have species of
Well,
non-human?
naturally, when you recover something that's either landed or crashed, sometimes you encounter dead pilots. And believe it or not, as fantastical as that sounds, it's true.
And so if the United States has alien technology that they're reverse engineering to try and have a military advantage or an economic advantage, it would be very interesting to know if China also had this technology. So I started down this rabbit hole that took me, like I said, to surprisingly the Falun Gong, and we'll talk about that in a minute, that crazy cult. And it also took me to China Daily, and it took me to censorship in the Galactic Federation, with somebody ending up in jail for like 8 years. It took me down all these different rabbit holes, and so I'm going to get into it. But this is kind of the reason I'm talking about it, is because of this original broadcast from News Nation talking about the US having alien crafts. And it's been a couple of weeks, I think, since it's come out, because I didn't want to jump on this immediately, because I always like to let stories sit for a minute to see kind of where they go, if it's just fake news or if there's more to it. And in this case, they've kind of discredited this guy, this David Gush guy, kind of being like, maybe he's not so credible. But that's just what they always do, right? And there's been many people who've talked about this in the past, from Bob Lazar, who said he was working on reverse engineering crafts back in like the 1980s. We have people talking about news reports from Roswell and that situation. If you even go out there now, there's a whole industry around it where people have like a extraterrestrial celebration. I actually want to go to it. I don't know the name of it, but I've seen, I think, a Vice video on it. Looks completely wild and completely bizarre. And oftentimes we think of the United States as the country that is always talking about the UFOs and abductions and things like this. And it was kind of a US phenomenon. And two things that were kind of used as an excuse in the past was, one, Americans were more likely to have video cameras like camcorders. So in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, this was kind of a luxury item and not many people had it. This is why you didn't have good footage. But Americans had higher incomes, so therefore they had more cameras at their disposal, and therefore they were more likely to take pictures. The other reason that people said there was alien sightings in the United States, especially out in like New Mexico and Nevada, and that area, was because that's where they were testing nuclear weapons. And the idea is that such a large explosion and such a large release of energy from a nuclear weapon or from an atom bomb, nuclear weapon, would attract extraterrestrial visitors because they were curious what was going on. Maybe it sent out gravitational waves that could be detected, or maybe it just was the release of such a large amount of energy could be picked up by alien technology, and so they would come to the United States first because they were investigating that explosion. But it doesn't really explain why there wasn't a whole lot of reports out of China, because China has nuclear weapons and they've tested them. And there was not a lot of reports out of the Soviet Union because they were testing nuclear weapons for many years to open above ground nuclear testing. But there doesn't seem to be a lot of reports from the Soviet time, at least that I've noticed or that I've heard of. And the Soviet Union had a very advanced space program. So it was always kind of like this American phenomenon. And I always found it interesting because I'm into sci-fi. I've talked about this in the past when I made a video about China's space program, about growing up on Farscape and Stargate and Star Trek. You know, Seven of Nine. You know, that was my thing, right? She was hot, man. She was smart. She was intelligent. She was logical. But yeah, growing up, those were the things that I watched. So I've always been fascinated with space and space exploration. I went to the Kennedy Center when I was young, I think like 11 or 12. I've been to the Cosmonaut Museum in Russia, and I would go here in China, but it's super secretive and I don't actually know where to, like, there's not really a space museum. If you guys know of a space museum here in China, leave me the address, because I've seen reports from different news agencies, but they're like news agencies who have access. And I'm just a random dude here, and I don't think they're going to let a random American into their space program to film. But if there's like some kind of space museum or something, let me know in a comment, because I would love to check that out. Because like I said, I've been to Kennedy Space Center, I've been to the Cosmonaut Museum in Moscow, and I just have a deep fascination with this. So let's get back to what this video is all about, is do Chinese believe in aliens? And why don't we see more videos or reports coming out of China, since it's such a large population and now many people have cell phones so they could document it. This story is a little wild, so I'll just kind of start and give you the brief overview of it, because it requires an entire video of like fully diving into the story, and I'm only going to do that if you guys respond to this in a positive way, because my personal fascination might not be what everybody else is interested in. But this story starts out that basically the 70s and 80s and 90s, there were a lot of reports about alien abduction here in China. And it was talked about quite frequently and openly. There was famous authors who were writing books about it, and it was just kind of a thing, a fascination. But what happened is there was this move out of the Cultural Revolution to kind of push away from the conspiracy theories, to push away from the heresy. It was called Xi Jiao, which is the term that was kind of used to umbrella a bunch of things that weren't approved by the CCP. And the CCP is the top authority in the nation, and that's where they want to remain. That's where they are. And they want people to see them as the top authority. And so anything that's spiritual, anything that's kind of alien, anything that is seeming to create a following outside of the the CPC, however you want to say it. Most people just say CCP. But anything outside of putting the Communist Party at the top is shunned upon and is censored. So this is where the story of the Falun Gong come in, because their leader, Mr. Li, the guy who founded this in the 90s here in China before he fled to the United States, he was pushing this idea, and I haven't read enough about it because it's a crazy cult and it's whole story that it's too crazy. But from what I was picking up when I was doing this research and why UFO stories have been kind of censored and pushed away, is that he believes that aliens have come to Earth and that they basically have corrupted humans, and that anybody who has a relationship, like a mixed relationship, so if you're Chinese and say a white American Caucasian, that is breaking the natural laws, and that's what the aliens are trying to do, is to have these mixed relationships so that when that child is born, it will be a godless child because it's not from one or the other race. And so he was pushing this idea that aliens were coming to Earth to try to destroy humanity, and it's wild and crazy. And the people that promote this oftentimes don't have a clue what the teachings actually are, because you'll see people who are actually, Americans, white Americans married to Chinese, and then they're going on about the Falun Gong, and I'm like, did you actually look into it? Because you guys are really at fault according to the leader. But anyways, that's a whole story. So as this cult was gaining momentum here in China, a lot of people started to kind of buy into it and started to practice what this guy was teaching, because it was offering something more than what the Communist Party was offering. And the Communist Party was basically offering we're the top, and you should essentially believe and trust in, almost, some would say, worship the party. But this guy was offering spiritual teachings, saying that there is a greater power, and essentially God is a greater power that you should be following, but aliens have come down to try and corrupt us so that we no longer follow the true teachings. And he was the only one who has the true teachings. Like any cult leader, he's the one you have to listen to. And so he was giving the true teachings, and if you didn't follow it, you were basically at fault. So during this cleanup, because he wasn't the only one, there was also the Galactic Federation that was being run by this other woman, and she was offering these same types of teaching, saying that the Galactic Federation was going to come to Earth and instead of destroy us, they were actually going to help us, make us a better species, help us solve all the world's problems. And so as people started to follow these different groups and these different occults, spirituality, aliens, mystic, all these different things, people in the government said, hey, we need to stop this. It's conspiracy theory. It's crazy. And if too many people start following it, they might have ideas about the way the government should be organized or things like that. So they put a stop to that in the 90s here in China. And that's when the censorship came in. But it's really interesting to me because on the one hand, you have the Chinese government saying no conspiracy theories, no fake information, none of this because it's not scientifically proven. We can't prove it. It's a lot of stories about abductees saying that they were, one famous story was a farmer, I think in Heilongjiang province up in the north, said that he was abducted and he had this love session with this alien that had like 12 fingers on each hand, and it lasted for like 40 minutes. And then when he was returned to Earth, I suppose that's kind of the story, when he was returned from the ship or whatever, this alien said that in some like 60 years a hybrid baby was going to be born. So there's like all these crazy things. And that story was even reported on in the China Daily, which is a major newspaper here. And Global Times, also a major newspaper here, state-run, obviously, reported on these stories too. And so that was like the early days, you know, early 2000s when these reports were kind of coming out. People saying that this happened in the 90s or it happened in the 80s or early 2000s. But after that, the government shut it down. And they said, we don't want any of this. Especially as social media became more popular, a lot of people were uploading stuff to social media and gaining a lot of following. And anybody who has a large following that isn't supporting the party usually ends up in trouble. Especially if you're promoting some kind of other teachings that are not in line with the party. And so it's really interesting because on one hand, all that is happening. But on the other hand, we have the scientific community. They have the FAST telescope, which is the very big telescope that they built. Talked about it in previous videos about mega projects. It's like the largest radio telescope in the world. And part of the mission when it was first talked about was that it was going to search for anomalous signals from space. And that was interpreted as looking for radio signals or kind of signals from potentially alien, you know, planets or alien technology. And there was even like a year ago a whole report that maybe they had received a signal from extraterrestrials, which again was debunked later, but again that went viral and everybody was like, oh my god, China has contacted aliens. So on the one hand you have the scientific community still pursuing this, and even with their Earth 2.0 project that is going to be launched in a few years, I think 2026 is when it's supposed to be launched. It's a telescope that is designed to look for exoplanets, which would be planets that are around other star systems that are in what they call the habitable zone. Speaking too much. That is in the habitable zone that Earth is in. And so it would look for alien planets that could support human life. And the idea partly is to maybe find planets that we could eventually move to at some future date if we get the technology to do that. But on the other hand, it's kind of looking for life on other planets and looking for life within the confines of how we understand life, carbon-based life, so to say, and looking for planets that could possibly have life on it. So it's a really interesting dichotomy, so to say, between what the people say and kind of the conspiracy theorists and kind of the cult and spirituality group that is being rightfully suppressed, because you can see how it can get out of hand. And when you have a large population, it doesn't take that many, like the percentage is very different. You know, 1% in the United States isn't very big, but 1% in China is a lot of people. And specifically to that point, there was a poll done a few years back that asked the global population, you know, went to I think 23 or 24 countries and asked like 1,000 people in each country, do they believe that aliens are walking among us, currently living among us, disguised as humans? In China, surprisingly scored very high. Like the people who did the survey, 42% of them said they believe aliens are already on Earth. So if you already have a population that has a belief that maybe aliens are already here, you don't want people continuing to push that narrative, because if people already believe, they're more likely to be like, oh yeah, that makes sense, let's start following this person or this group, which again could undermine the authority of the government. Very, very, very interesting rabbit hole I fell down. More stories than I expected. Obviously a few of them have gone viral in the past and they were, you know, explained away, like the floating city a few years back, I think 2010 or somewhere around that time. There was a floating city that was seen in, I think, Fushan. And yeah, lots of those stories have been explained away and a lot of them have been buried, so to say, especially here in China. But there is a community here in China Specifically in Hong Kong, there's a lot of people who have expos and stuff. I think the last expo was in 2019, from the research that I saw, and it's a alien UFO extraterrestrial expo where people come and give presentations on their beliefs and their sightings and their research, and it's quite vibrant. The woman said that she's been doing it for many years. I watched a video, I think, from South China Morning Post about the convention, and they talked to the woman who hosts it, and she says she's been doing it for many years. And it's just fascinating because, again, it's a very American thing in my mind, a very US-based thing in my mind when we think of UFOs. And it might be because of the freedom of the press, so they can report on these things as much as they want, whereas in other countries they tend to repress stories like that because it's not always based in truth or facts. Sometimes it's a farmer in a field who said he saw something or something happened to him, and there's no proof or evidence that it's real or actually happened. I don't know. I'm obviously fascinated by it, and I find it extremely interesting. Let me know in a comment below if you guys also find it interesting. And if you do think aliens exist, do you think they have come to Earth? Do you think that major nations like Russia and China and the United States have alien craft, like this guy David was saying? He came on national television and that's what he said. That's what he claimed. That's his claim, and he's not the only one who's claimed this. So do you think that China, Russia, United States, other large landmass, maybe like Brazil or even India, countries that are very large, do you think that they have recovered spacecraft? Let me know, because if it's true, it's absolutely wild. I mean, it's literally would change human existence if we could prove that aliens exist, and if we could prove that they've actually come here, it would be even more mind-blowing. So a little bit different China story. If you like this, give it a like and leave a comment, and I will see you guys in the next video. See you guys in the next video. And if you want to see something else, you can click here, because I have another video maybe about China's space program. If you're interested in that, you can see what China's been doing in space. So hope to see you guys over there. And if you like this video, I'll make another one with a deeper dive.